in this reconstructed extended recap of a late season 6 episode of The Lucy Show. The story unfolds in a way that stays faithful to the show's established comedic rhythm while expanding it into a continuous, uninterrupted narrative that captures every escalation, misunderstanding, and absurd improvisation Lucy Carmichael tends to create when she becomes convinced that a simple idea is actually a brilliant breakthrough waiting to happen. And everything begins on what looks like an ordinary morning at the bank where Lucy works under the increasingly exhausted supervision of Mr. Mooney, who has by this point in the series developed the kind of instinctive dread that makes him suspicious of any unusual enthusiasm coming from Lucy even before she speaks. And on this particular day, Lucy arrives with an energy that immediately signals trouble because she has either overheard part of a conversation between two clients or misread a memo pinned to the office board, or perhaps combined two unrelated financial concepts in her head into what she believes is a revolutionary insight. And before even fully sitting down, she begins talking rapidly about how the bank is missing a huge opportunity to improve efficiency, attract customers, and modernize its image, all of which sounds vaguely plausible in isolation, but becomes increasingly questionable the more she elaborates, and Mr. Mooney, already buried in paperwork and mentally preparing for the day to remain uneventful, slowly realizes that whatever Lucy is proposing will require him to either say no immediately or suffer the consequences later. But Lucy does not present her idea as a suggestion so much as a mission, explaining with full confidence that she has identified a gap in customer engagement that could be solved through what she calls a special promotional initiative, though she has not fully worked out what that means, only that it involves public interaction, creativity, and something she vaguely refers to as making banking fun, which is a phrase that visibly drains the remaining optimism from Mr. Mooney's face, and despite his clear refusal, he makes the mistake of asking one clarifying question, which Lucy interprets as permission to continue. So she launches into a detailed explanation that is simultaneously overconfident and underinformed, describing a plan that might involve inviting customers into the bank for a demonstration event, or setting up a temporary service booth outside, or perhaps offering some kind of contest tied to savings accounts. And as she talks, she begins mentally expanding the idea until it becomes a full-scale operation involving decorations, announcements, and possibly even local publicity, while Mr. Mooney repeatedly tries to interrupt, but fails to find a gap in her verbal momentum. And when he finally does manage to say that the idea is not approved and will not be approved and should be forgotten immediately, Lucy hears none of it as rejection, and instead hears it as cautious bureaucratic concern that can be overcome with preparation. And so she leaves his office determined to handle the details, which in Lucy language means she is about to proceed without authorization. And the next phase of the episode begins as she enlists her friend Mary Jane, who is initially skeptical and asks very reasonable questions such as whether Mr. Mooney actually agreed to any of this or whether there is any official documentation. But Lucy reassures her with vague confidence and selective interpretation of previous conversations, and Mary Jane, despite her better judgment, agrees to help because she has learned that resisting Lucy at this stage only delays the inevitable and sometimes makes it worse. And together they begin assembling the components of Lucy's plan, which includes contacting individuals she believes are potential customers, rearranging parts of the bank lobby without permission, and preparing materials that are meant to educate and entertain, but mostly confuse anyone who sees them. And as they work, Lucy's imagination continues to escalate the scope of the project, transforming what was originally a small idea into something closer to a public event with signage, demonstrations, and a structured schedule that exists only in her head. While outside of her awareness, the actual bank operations begin to suffer minor disruptions as forms are misplaced, appointments are rescheduled incorrectly, and staff members become increasingly unsure of what is officially happening versus what Lucy has simply decided is happening, and Mr. Mooney slowly begins noticing inconsistencies, starting with small irregularities such as missing paperwork or overheard conversations about events he did not authorize, and gradually building toward the realization that Lucy is actively implementing something behind his back, which forces him into the role of reluctant investigator as he tries to reconstruct what she is doing through fragmented information. And the comedic tension increases as Lucy attempts to maintain secrecy while also needing cooperation from bank staff, resulting in contradictory instructions and confused employees who are not sure whether to follow official protocol or Lucy's enthusiastic directives. And at some point, the situation expands beyond the bank itself when Lucy attempts to involve external participants, possibly convincing a client or visitor that they have been selected for a special opportunity, which leads to misunderstandings that ripple back into the bank's operations, and Mary Jane begins to express stronger concern, pointing out that nothing about this plan has proper approval, funding, or structure, but Lucy remains convinced that success is just one more step away and that any confusion is temporary and will resolve itself once people see the vision, and this belief drives her to push the plan further into public space, where logistical issues become more visible and harder to control. And eventually Mr. Mooney intervenes directly after gathering enough evidence to confirm that Lucy is behind the disruptions, leading to a confrontation in which he demands a clear explanation. And Lucy responds with a long and complicated justification that mixes partial truths, optimistic projections, and completely unrelated financial jargon she has picked up but does not fully understand, creating a speech that sounds impressive at first but collapses under scrutiny. And Mr. Mooney, though frustrated, realizes that Lucy genuinely believes she is helping, which forces him into the familiar position of trying to stop her without completely crushing her enthusiasm, because experience has taught him that total discouragement only delays the next scheme rather than preventing it. And meanwhile, the consequences of Lucy's actions reach their peak as the promotional activity or demonstration or event she has been organizing reaches its execution point, resulting in a series of escalating mishaps involving miscommunication, misplaced materials, and unexpected public reactions that turn what was supposed to be a controlled initiative into a chaotic but oddly harmless spectacle. And in true sitcom fashion, the chaos begins to loop back on itself as problems create accidental solutions, such as confused participants inadvertently attracting more attention, or a failed presentation becoming unintentionally entertaining enough to draw positive interest, and Mr. Mooney is forced to step in repeatedly to stabilize the situation while Lucy continues improvising fixes that often worsen the immediate problem but sometimes contribute to an unexpected overall outcome. And by the final segment of the episode, the situation resolves not through careful planning, but through coincidence and exhaustion, as external observers interpret the chaos in a more positive light than anyone inside the bank intended, resulting in a strange form of success that no one can fully explain or replicate. And Lucy, instead of recognizing the accidental nature of the outcome, interprets it as validation of her original idea and proof that her instincts were correct all along, while Mary Jane looks exhausted and Mr. Mooney looks defeated but relieved that the damage is not permanent, and the bank returns to its normal operations with minor repairs needed and several confused explanations filed away for future reference. And the episode ends with Lucy already beginning to generate another idea, Mr. Mooney preparing himself emotionally for the next inevitable disruption, and Mary Jane quietly questioning her life choices as the cycle of enthusiasm, chaos, and reluctant cleanup resets once again in the familiar rhythm that defines the series. Continuing from that point, the aftermath of the so-called successful disaster at the bank doesn't actually bring peace. Because in Lucy's world, success is never an endpoint. It is just evidence that the idea deserves to be expanded, improved, or repeated on a larger scale, and so even as Mr. Mooney is trying to quietly restore order, recheck the accounts, and convince himself that nothing irreversible has happened, Lucy is already mentally replaying the entire chain of events not as chaos, but as proof of concept. And she starts walking through the bank with Mary Jane pointing out all the things that worked better than expected, which in Lucy logic includes anything that did not result in immediate termination. And this is where the episode shifts into its second wave of escalation, because Lucy begins suggesting that the accidental attention they received should be capitalized on, a word she uses confidently but incorrectly, and she proposes that instead of treating the incident as a one-time mess, the bank should officially turn it into a recurring promotional strategy, which immediately makes Mary Jane stop walking and stare at her like she just suggested setting the building on fire as a branding exercise. But Lucy is already in motion, already imagining banners, announcements, maybe even local newspaper coverage, and Mr. Mooney, who overhears just enough of this from his office doorway, slowly realizes that the situation he thought was contained is about to mutate into a sequel, and he tries to intervene early this time. But Lucy has learned from previous interruptions and now speaks faster, overlaps conversations, and preemptively interprets objections as details to be worked out later, which is basically her version of legal immunity. And so she moves forward again, dragging reluctant staff into revised versions of her plan, while insisting that everything is under control, even as she reorganizes the bank's internal flow in ways that make absolutely no operational sense. And what follows is a long sequence of misunderstandings that spread through the institution like a slow-motion chain reaction, starting with minor scheduling confusion that escalates into duplicated appointments, misfiled documents, and customers being directed to the wrong counters, all of which Lucy tries to fix immediately but ends up complicating further because her solutions are always improvised under pressure and based on partial information, and Mary Jane becomes the exhausted translator of reality, trying to explain to Lucy that fixing things does not mean rearranging them into new problems. But Lucy is already too deep into the momentum of execution, treating every new complication as just another puzzle piece in a larger design that only she can currently see, which is not true, because nobody else sees it, and that's part of the issue. And meanwhile, Mr. Mooney transitions fully into crisis management mode, attempting to trace responsibility through a mixture of questioning employees, reviewing paperwork, and mentally preparing disciplinary speeches that he never gets to deliver because Lucy is always one step ahead in physical movement, if not in logic. And as the episode continues, the bank begins to resemble a system under constant reinterpretation, where rules change depending on who Lucy last spoke to. And the humor comes from the fact that everyone is trying to maintain professionalism inside a situation that is actively rejecting structure. And then there is a turning point where an external factor, usually a customer misunderstanding or a minor logistical error, causes Lucy's revised plan to interact with real-world expectations in an unexpected way, producing results that look superficially positive from the outside, such as increased attention or accidental praise. And this is the moment Lucy seizes on as confirmation that she is, in fact, doing something right despite all visible evidence suggesting otherwise. And she begins speaking with even more confidence, now treating earlier mistakes as necessary steps in the process, which alarms Mary Jane because it means there is no longer any logical stopping condition, and Mr. Mooney, realizing that confrontation alone will not work, attempts a different strategy of controlled limitation, trying to redirect Lucy's energy into smaller, contained tasks that cannot expand. But Lucy interprets even those restrictions as opportunities for refinement, which means she expands them anyway, just more creatively. And by this point, the bank is operating in a state of controlled instability where normal operations are technically happening, but constantly. interrupted by Lucy-driven side processes that nobody fully understands, but everyone is forced to participate in. And the comedy escalates through repetition, timing, and the growing exhaustion of everyone around Lucy, who is trying to keep up with her mental acceleration. And eventually, the situation reaches another peak where everything Lucy has been managing collides at once, creating a moment of total confusion involving staff instructions, customer interactions, and physical rearrangements of space that were all intended to improve efficiency but instead produce the opposite effect in the short term. And it is here that Mr. Mooney finally makes a decisive intervention, not by arguing with Lucy, but by physically stopping the operation and demanding absolute clarity on what is happening, forcing a pause in the chaos long enough for reality to reassert itself, and Lucy, confronted with the full scale of confusion, attempts to explain again, but this time even she starts to realize that her internal logic has drifted too far from actual outcomes. And there is a brief moment where she softens, not fully admitting failure, but recognizing that maybe some adjustments are needed, which in Lucy language is as close to accountability as it gets, and Mary Jane immediately tries to lock in that moment as progress, while Mr. Mooney uses it to reset the situation entirely, shutting down the experiment, restoring standard procedures, and quietly undoing as much of the Lucy-driven restructuring as possible without triggering another reinterpretation. And once order is restored, the bank slowly returns to its normal state, though everyone involved is visibly tired and slightly traumatized by the experience, and Lucy, instead of being discouraged, walks away already mentally reframing the entire incident as a learning experience that will inform her next idea, which is exactly what worries everyone else. And the episode closes with the familiar rhythm of sitcom equilibrium. Mr. Mooney sitting at his desk, trying to recover lost time, Mary Jane expressing quiet disbelief at what just happened, and Lucy cheerfully announcing that she has another thought, which is not a threat in her mind, but absolutely registers as one in everyone else's, leaving the cycle ready to repeat itself again in the next